Have you ever climbed into bed feeling completely exhausted after a long day, only to notice that something suddenly feels different the moment you lie down? Maybe it's a strange pressure that seems to appear out of nowhere. Maybe it's an uncomfortable sensation that makes it hard to fully relax. You try adjusting your position, hoping the feeling will disappear, but within minutes, something still feels slightly off. And that subtle feeling may be more important than most people realize. For some people, it's a sensation in the chest that becomes impossible to ignore. For others, it's a restless urge to move even when their body feels tired. You may feel perfectly fine throughout the day and then notice everything changes at night. Your body feels ready for sleep, yet your mind seems strangely alert. Or your mind feels calm, but your body refuses to settle into a comfortable position. The more attention you give it, the more noticeable it seems to become. And this is where many people start asking the wrong questions. Because the issue may not be what most people assume it is. Many people immediately blame stress, aging, or a bad night's sleep. But what if those explanations are only part of the story? What if a surprisingly common nighttime habit is quietly interfering with recovery, a habit so ordinary that most people never stop to think about it? And once you understand how it affects the body after 60, several strange experiences begin to make more sense. But first, there's something important you need to notice about what your body is actually trying to tell you. You may have noticed some of these experiences without ever connecting them together. A strange pressure appears somewhere in your body for no obvious reason. It doesn't necessarily feel painful, but it feels noticeable enough to keep drawing your attention. Sometimes it feels like a subtle weight pressing from the inside. Other times it feels more like tension that shouldn't be there. You try to ignore it and focus on falling asleep, yet the sensation remains just strong enough to keep you aware of it. And most people never realize how often this happens during the night. Then there's that restless feeling that seems impossible to explain. Your body feels tired, but something keeps encouraging you to move. You switch positions once and feel better for a moment. Then a few minutes later, the urge returns. One shoulder becomes uncomfortable, a hip starts demanding attention, a leg suddenly feels like it needs a stretch. And before you know it, you're moving again without understanding why. Sometimes your heart feels more noticeable when everything around you becomes quiet. Not necessarily racing, not necessarily irregular, just present in a way that feels difficult to ignore. The silence of the night seems to amplify every sensation. Every beat feels slightly stronger. Every shift inside your body feels easier to detect. And that awareness alone can make relaxation feel surprisingly difficult. For others, breathing becomes the sensation that captures their attention. You notice each breath entering and leaving your body. You become aware of positions that feel easier to breathe in and positions that somehow feel less comfortable. Nothing dramatic, nothing that seems serious, just subtle differences that your body keeps reacting to. And those small reactions may be more important than they appear. Then there are the nights when your mind refuses to cooperate. Your body feels exhausted after a long day, your eyes feel heavy, your muscles feel ready for rest, but your thoughts continue moving from one subject to another. One memory leads to another, one concern turns into a dozen different thoughts. And the harder you try to stop thinking, the more awake you seem to become. Perhaps the strangest experience happens the following morning. You remember sleeping, you remember being in bed for hours, yet you wake up feeling as though recovery never fully happened. Your energy feels incomplete, your focus feels weaker, something feels missing even though you technically got sleep. Most people assume these moments are random coincidences, but what if they are actually connected by a pattern that almost nobody notices? And this is where things become surprisingly confusing for most people. You would expect the body to respond the same way every night. After all, you're sleeping in the same room, using the same mattress, the same pillow supports your head, the same blanket covers your body. and yet the experience can feel completely different from one night to the next. That contradiction leaves many people searching for answers in the wrong places. For some people, sleeping on their left side feels noticeably better. They feel calmer, more comfortable, less aware of strange sensations. It becomes the position they trust the most. But here's what makes this so confusing. Another person can try that exact same position and feel worse. The same solution produces two completely different results.
The same pattern appears with movement during the night. Some people roll over and immediately feel relief. The pressure fades, the discomfort eases, the body seems to settle down. But for others, changing positions starts an entirely different chain reaction. They become more aware of their body, more aware of their breathing, and sometimes even more awake than before. You've probably experienced nights that seemed perfectly normal. You went to bed at your usual time, followed your normal routine. Nothing felt different during the day. You expected another ordinary night of sleep. Yet something felt off from the moment you got into bed. The night became fragmented, and you woke up wondering what happened. Then the following night arrives. You repeat almost the exact same routine, the same bedroom, the same environment, the same sleeping position. Yet somehow you sleep much better. No obvious explanation, no clear reason, just a completely different outcome from what appeared to be the same circumstances. Most people respond by assuming the body is unpredictable. They blame age, stress, bad luck, or simply accept that sleep becomes strange after 60. But what if the body is actually responding to something specific, something subtle that changes from night to night without attracting attention? Because once you begin looking at these experiences differently, an important pattern starts to emerge, and that pattern may explain why your body reacts in ways that seem completely inconsistent. I'm Dr. William Harris, a sleep specialist, and over the years, I've had conversations with countless older adults about sleep. Many arrived with the same frustrations, the same unanswered questions, the same confusing nighttime experiences. And what surprised me most was how similar their stories often were, even when they came from completely different backgrounds. That was the first clue that something larger might be happening. Many believed something was wrong with them. They worried that their body was no longer functioning the way it should. Some assumed they were developing a serious sleep problem. Others feared that poor sleep was simply becoming their new normal. Night after night, they searched for explanations, yet the answers they found rarely matched what they were actually experiencing. And that uncertainty often became just as exhausting as the sleep issues themselves. Because confusion has a way of making every symptom feel bigger. Others assumed it was simply part of getting older. They told themselves this was just what happens after 60, that waking up tired was unavoidable, that restless nights were something they had to accept. And over time, many stopped looking for answers altogether. They adapted to the fatigue, adjusted their expectations, and slowly accepted a level of exhaustion that didn't feel normal. But again and again, I noticed something interesting. People described different symptoms, different sensations, different sleeping habits, yet hidden beneath those differences was a remarkably similar pattern. The details changed, the stories changed, but certain nighttime experiences kept appearing over and over again, and most people never recognized the connection. A person might complain about pressure in the chest. Someone else talked about constantly changing positions. Another described waking up feeling unrested despite spending hours in bed. At first, those experiences seem unrelated, but when viewed together, they begin forming a much larger picture, a picture that challenges many common assumptions about nighttime recovery. And this is where things start becoming truly interesting. because the body may be responding far more intelligently than most people realize. The pattern itself isn't obvious at first glance. In fact, most people completely overlook it. They focus on individual symptoms rather than the hidden connection between them. They look at the discomfort, the restlessness, the interrupted sleep, but not the underlying process linking them together. And once you begin to see that process, the way you think about nighttime recovery can change entirely. Which brings us to the hidden factor that may be influencing these experiences in the first place. First, this isn't random, and that may be one of the most important things to understand, because when something happens repeatedly, the body is usually responding to something, even if that response doesn't make sense at first glance, even if it feels unpredictable, even if it seems to happen for no reason at all. The pattern may be hidden, but that doesn't mean the pattern isn't there. Your body is not malfunctioning. In fact, many of the sensations that frustrate people the most may actually be signs that the body is still doing what it was designed to do. It is constantly monitoring, constantly adjusting, constantly responding to changes that occur throughout the night. Most of these adjustments happen automatically, without conscious awareness, and that is precisely why most people never notice them.
Think about the urge to change positions. At first, it feels like an inconvenience, something that interrupts sleep, something that prevents comfort. But what if that urge exists for a reason? What if the movement itself is part of a larger process, a process designed to help the body adapt to changing conditions? And what if ignoring those signals creates even more disruption? The same thing can be said about discomfort. Most people immediately view discomfort as the problem, but sometimes discomfort is simply information, a message rather than a malfunction, a signal rather than a mistake. The body detects something, processes that information, then responds in the best way it can. And those responses often appear long before we understand why they are happening. This becomes even more interesting after the age of 60, because the body starts processing nighttime information differently than it did decades earlier. Subtle changes become easier to notice. Minor discomforts can feel more significant. Recovery patterns may shift, and the body becomes increasingly dependent on signals that help it determine whether a position, condition, or environment is supportive. Most people never realize how much information their body is evaluating while they sleep, but it is happening continuously throughout the night. And here's where things start becoming truly fascinating. The body isn't only responding to pressure, or discomfort, or movement. It's responding to information gathered from multiple sources at the same time. Information that may influence how comfortable, stable, and restorative sleep feels from one moment to the next. And once you understand the hidden system responsible for processing those signals, many of these strange nighttime experiences begin to look completely different. Which brings us to a concept that explains why the body sometimes seems determined to keep moving when all you want to do is sleep. What you're feeling is something I call a night mismatch. Not a disease, not a diagnosis, just a simple way to describe a situation where your body and your sleeping conditions stop working together as smoothly as they should. Most people assume sleep is either happening or it isn't, but the reality is often far more subtle. Small changes can create effects that are easy to feel but difficult to explain. A night mismatch can begin without any obvious warning signs. At first, everything feels normal. You settle into bed, you close your eyes, you expect the body to gradually drift into recovery mode. But something doesn't align the way it should. You may not consciously notice it, yet your body often does. Sometimes the mismatch is so subtle that it feels like a vague discomfort, a slight awareness that keeps pulling your attention back to your body, a feeling that your position isn't quite right, a sensation that something needs adjusting.
You can't always identify the source. You only know that fully relaxing seems harder than it should be, and that feeling may continue growing throughout the night. This is where many people unknowingly enter a cycle that repeats for hours. When the body detects that mismatch, it can trigger what I call a body flip signal, an internal response that encourages movement, a shift in position, a change in posture, or sometimes a brief increase in alertness. The body is not necessarily trying to wake you up. It's trying to gather new information. It's attempting to improve the situation the best way it can. Think about how often you've rolled over without making a conscious decision. One moment you're asleep, the next moment you've changed positions. Many people assume those movements are meaningless, but the body rarely wastes energy without a reason. It is constantly monitoring comfort, pressure, balance, and other signals that most people never notice. The important thing to understand is that the body flip signal isn't necessarily the problem. In many cases, it's the body's attempt to solve a problem. The challenge is that the signal can appear again and again throughout the night. Each adjustment creates temporary relief, then the process starts over. The body responds, you move, and the cycle quietly repeats while recovery becomes increasingly fragmented. Which raises an even bigger question about the specific symptoms this cycle can create without people ever realizing what's actually happening. This may help explain why certain nighttime sensations seem to appear without warning. For some people, it begins with discomfort that only shows up in specific positions. A position may feel perfectly comfortable at first, then minutes later, something changes. A strange awareness starts building, a subtle sensation becomes harder to ignore, and the body begins responding before the mind fully understands what is happening. That response often becomes the beginning of a much larger cycle.
Some people notice reflux becoming more noticeable in certain positions. Others describe a feeling of pressure in the chest that seems to come and go. Not necessarily pain, not necessarily something dramatic, just enough discomfort to keep drawing attention back to the body. The sensation may fade after moving, then quietly return later, and because the pattern isn't always obvious, many people never connect the dots. For others, the issue feels more related to breathing. You suddenly become aware of each breath. You notice positions that feel easier and positions that somehow feel less natural. The difference may be subtle, yet your body reacts as though the difference matters. You adjust without thinking, and for a brief period, everything feels better again. Then there are those who simply cannot seem to stay comfortable for very long. They find a position that feels perfect, they settle down, the body begins relaxing, and then, without warning, something starts feeling off again. A shoulder becomes noticeable, a hip demands attention, a pressure point develops, and the urge to move returns once more. What makes this so frustrating is that movement often works. You change positions, the sensation eases, the discomfort fades, the body settles, everything feels normal again, but only temporarily, because later in the night, the same process often begins all over again, and most people never realize how many times this sequence repeats. But this is only part of what's happening. The real issue may not be the discomfort itself. The real issue may be what these repeated interruptions are doing beneath the surface. Each adjustment, each shift, each brief reaction from the body may be influencing sleep in ways that are difficult to notice while they are happening. And over time, those hidden interruptions may begin affecting something far more important than comfort alone. The more often the body interrupts its own recovery process, the more difficult it becomes to achieve truly restorative sleep. And this is where many people become trapped in a frustrating cycle. They spend enough hours in bed, they technically get sleep, they may even believe they slept through the entire night, yet something still feels missing the next morning. The energy isn't there, the clarity isn't there, and the feeling of recovery never fully arrives.
The frustrating part is that many of these interruptions happen below conscious awareness. You don't necessarily sit up in bed, you don't always remember waking up, you don't look at the clock, you don't realize anything happened at all. From your perspective, the night appears normal, but beneath the surface, your body may be far more active than you realize, and that activity can quietly influence how rested you feel. Think about how many times you've woken up and immediately felt tired. Not exhausted because you slept too little, but tired in a different way, a heavy kind of fatigue, a mental fog that follows you into the morning, a feeling that your brain never fully reset overnight. Many people describe it as sleeping without truly recovering, and that distinction may be more important than it seems. As the body continues reacting throughout the night, sleep can become increasingly fragmented, not necessarily shorter, just less efficient. The deeper stages of recovery may become harder to maintain. The body keeps shifting, adjusting, responding, trying to solve small problems as they appear, and each response has the potential to subtly interrupt the recovery process, even when you have no memory of it happening. This is why some people wake up feeling surprisingly worn down after what should have been a good night's sleep. The hours were there, the opportunity for recovery was there, yet the quality felt different. Something seemed to interfere with the process, not once, but repeatedly. And because those interruptions remain largely invisible, most people never suspect they occurred at all. Meanwhile, the body continues doing exactly what it believes it needs to do. Monitoring, responding, making adjustments, sending signals, repeating patterns that may continue for hours. And the longer those patterns continue unnoticed, the greater their potential impact on nighttime recovery. Which helps explain why some people eventually begin searching for ways to help the body reduce these repeated reactions in the first place. And this is exactly why some people started looking for ways to help their body calm this response, not by forcing sleep, not by trying to overpower the body, and not by simply hoping the problem disappears on its own. Instead, they began focusing on something much more important: supporting the body's natural nighttime recovery process, working with the body's signals rather than constantly fighting them. And that shift in perspective often changes how people think about sleep altogether.
The goal is surprisingly simple: help the body feel more comfortable throughout the night, help reduce unnecessary alert signals that may keep appearing in the background, help create conditions that allow recovery to happen more naturally. Because when the body feels supported, it often spends less energy reacting, less energy adjusting, less energy searching for a better position, and more energy focusing on restoration. Many people assume deeper recovery comes from doing more supplements, more routines, more complicated strategies. But sometimes the most effective approach begins by reducing what is triggering unnecessary responses in the first place. That's where things become interesting, because the body often knows how to recover. The challenge is creating conditions that allow it to do so. This is one reason many people prefer approaches that work with the body rather than against it. They aren't looking to shut the body down. They aren't looking to ignore important signals. They're looking for ways to help the body feel more balanced during the night, more stable, more comfortable, and less likely to enter the same repetitive cycle over and over again. Most people never realize how important that distinction can be. As awareness of these nighttime patterns has grown, many people have started exploring options designed to support healthy nighttime recovery. Approaches that aim to encourage relaxation rather than force it. Approaches that focus on supporting the body's natural processes. Approaches that fit easily into an existing routine. And while no single solution works for everyone, many people appreciate having options that align with how the body already functions, especially when those options are recommended within a broader sleep support strategy. Because recovery rarely depends on just one factor alone.
If you're curious about one doctor-approved option that some people explore for nighttime support, you'll find more information in the pinned comment below. But regardless of what approach you choose, understanding what's happening is always the first step, because awareness changes everything. Once you recognize the patterns, you start seeing them differently. You begin noticing signals that previously seemed random, and that's important, because one final piece of the puzzle remains unexplained, the very thing that may determine whether the body enters this cycle in the first place. If you've experienced these sensations, it doesn't automatically mean something is wrong with you, and that may come as a relief to hear, because many people spend years assuming their body is failing them. They worry that poor sleep is simply becoming permanent. They blame themselves for not sleeping better. They blame age. They blame stress. And all the while, they may be overlooking what their body is actually trying to communicate. It also doesn't mean you're failing at sleep. In fact, many people who struggle with these experiences are doing everything they believe they're supposed to do. They're going to bed at a reasonable hour, trying to maintain healthy routines, making an effort to create a comfortable sleep environment. Yet the same sensations keep appearing, the same interruptions keep happening, and the same questions remain unanswered. In many cases, your body may simply be responding to signals the best way it knows how, trying to adapt, trying to adjust, trying to protect itself, trying to maintain balance throughout the night. Every shift in position, every subtle sensation, every moment of increased awareness may be part of a larger process taking place behind the scenes, a process most people never consciously notice. The important thing is recognizing that these experiences are not always random. There may be a reason behind them, a pattern behind them, a trigger behind them. And once you begin paying attention, certain details become difficult to ignore. You start noticing when the sensations appear. You notice when they improve. You notice when they return. And suddenly, the experience begins looking far less mysterious. Many people spend years focusing on the symptoms themselves, the pressure, the discomfort, the restlessness, the constant need to move. But what if those symptoms are only the visible part of the story? What if they are responses rather than causes? What if the real explanation exists earlier in the chain of events? That possibility changes everything. Because here's the question most people never ask. What actually causes a night mismatch in the first place? Why does the body decide that something isn't quite right? What information is it responding to? What signals is it trying to interpret? And why do those signals seem to affect some nights more than others? The answer isn't what most people think, and it may begin long before your head ever touches the pillow.